Yo, today we're going to be making this blooming rose in Blender geometry nodes. All it is using a preset modeled petal here, and then we're just going to instance it around a curve and use some color ramps and some math to rotate it and scale it. Before I get started, I just want to show you guys what I've been working on for the past few months. It's a pack of 8 fully animated blooming flowers from the bulb stage all the way to a fully bloomed flower. They all have different features for scaling and rotation, and almost all of them are based off of a curve on the branch or the stem of it, so you can always change the shape of that. All the textures and flowers themselves will all be royalty free, so you don't have to worry about licensing. So you can model this petal yourself by just using a plane, subdividing it, and then using a lattice to kind of shape it into a petal. I'll also have this petal and this outer petal in the description so you can follow along, and both of them will be textured, so download those if you don't want to model them yourself. To get started, we're going to start out with a curved path. I'm going to rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees so it's standing up. And then I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to drag it up so that bottom point is going to be on the origin now. Open up a geometry nodes panel, and this is pretty much going to be our rose. This is where all the petals are going to be spawning off of. So we'll do a curve to points and we'll do a instance on points. And just before these two nodes too, I'm going to add in transform geometry. We might need to use this later just to scale the curve. It's just easier to do it in here than to rather scale the actual curve itself in edit mode. And the curve to points are going to be the petals. So on average, I think roses grow 20 to 40 petals. We'll go 30 just to go in the middle of it. We'll bring in our petal that we have here. So now we have this on there. I'm going to bring this rotation point from the curve to points onto the instance on points. I'm going to use a rotate Euler on a local, because we're going to want to change the z-axis. Index, use a math node, set to multiply. What we're going to do here is get the golden ratio or the golden angle for each petal and how it's going to rotate on the z-axis. So we'll use a combine XYZ, plug it in here, and plug that in there. It's just 137.5 divided by 57. So that'll give you the right rotation, and it kind of offsets it every other petal. So I don't think it's every natural growing thing, but most plants and flowers grow with this ratio. Just keep this in mind. It's a good thing to use whenever you're making natural growth. Okay, so now that we have this base instancing set up, we're going to want to do the rotation. So I'm going to just frame all of this right now, and we will name it spawn. So now we're going to bring in a rotate instances, and I'm going to use a gradient texture to scale them. So it'll make the center petals smaller and fold out later than the outer petals. So we'll use a gradient texture, and I'm going to set it to spherical. We'll add a position and a vector rotate. For the vector rotate on these bottom axis, we'll change the middle to 1 and the bottom one to 0 and the angle to 90. Plug that into the gradient texture, and then I'm going to use a color ramp after that to adjust it a bit more, and we'll use a math node set to subtract to animate it. And since we're only going to want this x-axis to actually unfold the petal, we'll just use a combine XYZ and plug only the x in. So we're going to go back to this transform geometry that we made from the start. And on this X value, I'm going to change this to 0.06. And this is just going to shrink it down. And basically, the higher this value is, the more gap in between those petals you're going to have. So now this color ramp, we can bring the black up a bit, and it's going to kind of create a threshold for the rotation of the petals. And this white, you could use a map range to go past these. I'm just going to change the value. If you change the value, it raises the color ramp even more. So I'm going to change this to 1.5. You can see it brings it up a bit. And we'll just bring it to the left just a bit. You can see when we change this, it's going to rotate it. The subtract will bring up where you can see it kind of folding in like that. So for these settings, 2.3 around there works. And I'm going to just change this to -1. Just going to give a little bit of a tilt on the petals and make them look a bit more natural. So next we're going to want to scale these center petals and make them smaller than the outer petals. I'm going to use a scale instance. And I'm going to use the same gradient control. So I'll take all these and copy paste them. And we're not going to use the combine XYZ just yet. I'll plug the subtract into scale. And I'm going to change this white, instead of 1.5, I'm going to change it to 4. And we'll just have to change these settings just a tad. And you can see it starting to come together. Just going to frame these really quickly. This will be the rotate. This will be the first scale. It's looking pretty good so far. I'm going to add some keyframes to the subtract node just so we can see it a bit better while we're actually changing all these values. So we'll start somewhere around here, add a keyframe, we'll go up a couple frames, and then I'll bring it down to 2.1. So now if we play it, you can see it blooming. But there's still quite a bit cutting out in the bottom here, and it could use a couple more shape changes. So we're going to duplicate this scale instances. We can actually take this whole frame and just duplicate it. I'll plug this in through here. And I'm going to add a combine XYZ. So we're only going to be changing the X and the Z. So I'll change the Y to 1 just so it has some geometry there. And then I'll take this gradient again and duplicate it, and we'll use this one on the Z. In the previous ones, this white was set to 4. This white was set to 1.5. I'm going to set these two to 3. So just make sure that you have these set to different values. These whites are brighter. If you don't have this, it messes up the whole setup pretty much. You can see I'll change this just to 1. It changes the whole rotation of it. Just make sure you have these copied the same that I have. So you can see already it kind of flattens it once we add these new scales. And I want to just bring these down just a bit though. 3 and change this one to 3. So you can see now they're pretty narrow and they're a bit longer. I'm going to change the X one. So this is this. I'm going to invert the X on the white. Then I'm going to bring down the value quite a bit. You can see this is almost like the width of the petal. Go somewhere around here and maybe I'll bring the black up a bit. And then for the Z, this is pretty much going to make it more bulbous. So I'm going to change this to 0.8, and you can see immediately that changes huge. Actually looks like a rose now. You can make the rose look pretty different by just changing the scale of these. There's a bunch of different flowers that you could really make with this. Might add a few more petals. Might go to 40. Then I'll go back down to these scales down here, and I want to make these bottom petals a little bit wider. Just decrease the subtract a bit so it gets rid of some of those collisions. You're going to have some in the bottom here. I couldn't figure out a way to get rid of these bottom collisions, but mostly when it's unfolding, there isn't a lot that you can really see. Use a transform geometry. And before it's actually bloomed, so when it's fully bloomed like this, I'm going to just keyframe all these scales. And then when it's turned into a bulb at the beginning, I'm going to scale it down quite a bit. I'll scale it down to 0.4 on all axes, and then I'll just scale it down on the X a bit. So now when it grows, kind of looks like it's growing with the bloom. When you do this though, it's going to kind of bring it down a bit. You can always fix this by just animating the translation on the X. See, we'll just keyframe it here, and then fully bloomed, bring it up there maybe. Now it pretty much blooms from the same spot. So if you want to fix the bottom, if you're going at any other camera angles, that's where the second leaf in the description you can download would be useful. So we'll add in a join geometry down here, just so we can connect both of these. And I'm going to add a curve circle. So the curve circle is what we're going to be instancing these leaves off. We'll go curve to points, connect the curve circle, and we'll go instance on points, connect that, and we'll bring in the leaf that we have. So you can see if we connect this now, or if we just view it, they're all going to be pointing in one direction. So I'll take the rotation from curve to points and bring it into the instance on points. I'm only going to want 4 or 5 of these leaves, so I'll go 4, and you can see it's still sideways. It's not really matching the same orientation as the flower, but we'll fix that after the fact. So I'm going to add a rotate Euler in here. Just for now, we're not going to use it just yet. So the way that we're going to make these fold is we're not going to rotate them with a rotation axis. We're going to recreate the simple deform just like in the leaf video that I just made. So to do that, we'll use a separate XYZ, a combine XYZ, and we'll plug in a math node set to multiply in the middle. We're going to use the Y coordinate for now, so we'll plug in the Y to the middle and the value into Y again. And we'll use a vector rotate the end here with a position 2. We'll plug the position into the vector here and into the vector on the vector rotate, and take these 3 and plug in the vector from the combine XYZ into the angle. So we're going to keep the axis like this on this one, and we can take the geometry from the green leaf that we have, add a set position, and we can plug in that now back into the instance so it shows up. And we'll use the vector from the vector rotate into the position. So you can see now it's bending them down. And the reason why I did this instead of just using the X rotation is the bottom point of each leaf stays the same. So it will stick to the stem. So we're going to use this. I'm going to drag it down just a bit. And I'm going to duplicate this whole system. We're going to want one on the Y-axis, and then we're going to duplicate again. And I'm going to make sure that I put this before this Y one. So the one we duplicate, we're going to put in front. Plug that through. And the first one, the first set position, is going to be the Z. So we'll change all these over. And this axis, I'm going to change from 1 down here to 1 in the middle. Change the bottom one to 0. So you can see now this one is making the leaves curl in more. So we're going to use both of these to animate it and make it look a bit better. So this one will be the Z bend. This one will be the Y bend. Now if we add it back into the join geometry with the flower that we made, instead of fixing it before we instance these, this setup won't work really if you do that. So we're just going to add a transform geometry after the fact. And on the Y, we'll make it -90. So now I'm going to go into this rotate Euler that we made originally. I'm going to change the X to 180. So it's going to flip them around. And then I'm going to change the Z to 100 just until these come together at the top. Now we'll go to the Y. And we can change these to where they're kind of bent, but still somewhat straight. And then we can go back here and adjust this even more so it comes together and there's no gaps in between them really. You'll see some of the sides will be gapped like this. That's what we did the Z bend for. So now we can fix that and make it look a bit more bulb-like. We'll just change these settings a tad. Add a little bit to the Y here. You can see if we leave that at 0, it cuts through. If we just add it to -1 even, it gets rid of that pretty much. Bring it in just a bit more here. Go -0.65 maybe, and then change the Z here, there. So this part's a lot of fine tuning, really just to get those numbers correct so there's no colliding. Pretty much all you would want to change is this rotate Euler and go through this multiply and this multiply and just see what works best. I'm just going to hide the flower here so we can see the base of it a bit better. Because this, unlike the flower, you're going to be seeing the base. This is pretty much going to hide the base of that flower, so we don't see in the beginning it has that opening. We're not going to see that. This is going to be covering that. So you want to make sure that this leaf part is pretty good with no collisions. I'm going to change the radius of the circle that all the leaves are spawned on, so it kind of tucks in that bottom a bit. So that looks good. Now I can start changing these values a bit more to fit that. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out right now. There's a couple gaps that I could probably fix if I sat here for a bit longer. Again, if you want to really fine tune this, all you would need to do is just change the multiply on the Y bend, the multiply on the Z bend, and then also play around with these rotate Eulers. You can also change the set position offset a bit, very slightly though, because it will change how it rotates. So I'll go over quickly the settings that I changed. So curve circle, I changed to 0.01. Rotate Euler, here's the numbers for these, and the Z bend and the Y bend. Then again, there's just a transform geometry with -90 on the Y rotation, just so it goes vertical instead of horizontal. If we join that back with the flower that we made, it's too big, so we're going to scale it down just a bit. I think 0.5 will do. It's good. And we're also going to keyframe these scales. Right when the flower is down at this actual bud stage, I want this green outer bud to be fully surrounding it. So I'm just going to change these scales to where it pretty much covers that. Change the X value down a bit, and I'm going to make it more bulb-like and just shrink it down on the Z axis. So now we can start animating the actual opening of this green petal. We'll keyframe the Y rotation because that's what's going to be opening these. Keyframe it at the start here, and right around here will probably be its full open. Drag this out until it looks decent, and I'll keyframe it. And right in this instance on points, we're going to scale these. So I'll just add a value just to make it a bit easier. And see what scale we want. Probably 1 for this. And then once the flower blooms, I'm going to turn it down to 0.2 maybe. So I ended up going with 0.5. This is a good size for the end. Play it from the start. It blooms and it shrinks and then the flower grows. And then we can also animate this Z bend. You can see once it fully grows, they're still kind of bent. You can always animate this the same way as the Y bend. So now that we have both the flower and the green leaves blooming out, they're all still blooming at the same size, which you can keep if you want. I think it just looks a bit better if you add a transform geometry at the very end. So this is after the join geometry with joining the green leaves and the petals. And I'm going to keyframe it right when it's fully bloomed. And then I'm going to go back to the very beginning and I'll make it 0.5. It's just going to make it look like it's more growing while it's blooming. So there's a couple more things that you can add. We can add some noise to these leaves when they crinkle up and they age. And then we can also add some noise to the tip of the rose petals just to add a bit more detail. We'll start on the flower petal. We're going to use this object right in the very beginning when we use the spawn points. So I'll add a set position, plug it in right there. We'll use a noise texture, a vector math, duplicate it. We'll switch the first one to subtract. The second one we'll put to multiply and duplicate it once more, and we'll change this one to scale. Okay, so we'll plug the noise texture into subtract, change the bottom values all to 0.5, subtract into multiply, multiply into scale, and the scale into offset. Just before we change anything, I'm going to add a position and connect that into the bottom multiply. It's adding the noise to the whole petal now, which isn't what we want. So I'm going to go into the actual petal geometry. Right here is the tip of the petal, so I'm going to go into edit mode and just select all those vertices here, and I'm going to make a new group. We'll just name this tip. So now if we go back into geometry nodes, this group input that we have here, I'm going to take this gray node here and just drag it into the selection. And now we can click this box here and type in tip. Now it's only going to use that vertex selection that we made, and it's a bit too much now, so I'll turn down the scale and maybe turn up the scale on the noise. I want it to be very slight, just to add a bit more detail. You can see if we take it out, they're all pretty round, pretty flat. Put it in, and it looks a lot more natural. So again, we'll just copy this whole thing just without that petal geometry. And I'll duplicate it, and we'll press Alt-P to get it out of that frame. And right before this Z-bend that we have, I'm just going to plug this in here. Unlike the flower petals, this noise displacement I'm going to animate. You can see when it folds up here, the noise affects it quite a bit. I'm going to just turn the scale down to 0, and then once it blooms around the end, turn it up a bit so it looks like they're crinkling up. And I'll just add some more noise here. And also another thing that you can do is always just change the shape of the petal to match the settings that you have. So you can see right here it's clipping quite a bit. If we just change the lattice just a tiny bit, and get rid of some of those collisions. It's not going to be 100% perfect. You probably will have some collisions. So you can see there's a little bit of colliding here with the green petals. I'm going to actually remove this value that I made for the scale of these. I don't want the whole scale to be under one value. I want to change it per axis just so I can get rid of this collision. So again, we'll go at the very beginning and keyframe everything at 1. And then we'll go up a bit and bring down the X value. So you can see that already gets rid of that collision. So it's kind of like a keyframe thing. You kind of have to go around and see what works best. There's no full setting for it. So that's pretty much it for the model. Like I said, you can always go over and fix all the collisions to make it look perfect. I'm just going to change these keyframes just a bit so they are a bit smoother while it's actually unfolding. We'll just drag this back and we'll scale out this Bezier. It's more of a ramp. So it looks pretty good right now. I just think it's growing a bit too much. I'm going to change the final scale that we did for all of it. So when it starts small and it grows big, I'm going to change the small value to 0.7 instead of 0.5. Now you can see it doesn't look like it's growing as much. I'll just do a quick overview of the materials here. If you ever want to make your own flower petals, I found that the best way to make the material is with a mix shader, a translucent, and a principled BSDF. I tried using subsurface, but it only works under some lighting. This seems to work a bit better under multiple different lighting setups. Now, of course, this is a pretty bad lighting setup. You can make this look a lot better, like in the beginning of the video. We're just going to raise the scale of the displacement that we have on the tip of the petals, and maybe the detail too. And I'll turn down the scale to 0.05. So it's very subtle, but it's still there. So I'll just quickly go over all the settings for the whole setup. First stage, we have the spawn. So We're just going to spawn a bunch of these petals around this curve. And then we have the rotate group, which is going to rotate them up and downwards. Then we have the scale, which is going to make the center petals smaller than the outer ones. And then we have the second scale group here, which is going to make the petals more concaved and narrow. Again, just make sure the white here is at 3 and the white here is at 3. Otherwise, it won't look the same. Then we have a transform geometry, which is just going to fix the scale and fix the position of it while it grows. Then we have the leaves down here that are spawning on a curve circle, curve to points. So we have the Z bend here, and then we have the Y bend. We have an instance on points, which is going to be instancing those. And we animated the scale to fix the size of it just a bit. And then we have a transform geometry, which is going to be rotating it upwards and just making it more bulb shaped. Join geometry, which is going to add the flower in, and a final scale that we did for all of it. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial. If you guys have any questions, just drop them down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.